Greetings, loyal viewers, and welcome back. Well, I kept y'all waiting long enough. Let us finally go ahead and give my quick and honest thoughts on Godzilla and Kong, The New Empire. And by the way, I'm not wearing these throughout the entire review. I'm not that kind of pretentious. Much like the previous installment, the film begins right off the bat with showing us Kong, only this time, we see more and more of him living it out in his new home in Hollow Earth. Unlike Godzilla vs. Kong, this film immediately immerses audiences in a whirlwind of adrenaline-pumping action, offering a cinematic experience that is as big and bold as the creatures it showcases. As well as some pretty brutal moments, especially for a PG-13 film, but I think that ship's already sailed on that one. This ain't just any ordinary monster movie, it's a roller coaster ride of epic proportions, a popcorn extravaganza that thrills at every turn. It's pretty clear at this point that director Adam Wingard and Academy Award nominated writer Terry Rossio knew what audiences wanted, and even more so than the last film, in my honest opinion, they absolutely nailed it. One of the film's greatest strengths when it comes to the Titans themselves is in its oftentimes breathtaking global scale, transporting us, the viewers, to iconic locales around the world as Godzilla and Kong battling different species in the aforementioned Hollow Earth. Each setting is brought to life with stunning detail, which I personally think is all the more impressive when you consider the film's $135 million production budget. And yeah, that is still a lot of money, to be fair, I'm not denying that, but it's considerably the lowest production budget of the Monsterverse films to date. The very fact that the effects artists can still pull off something that looks this good with less money, to which I'm also hoping those same effects artists got paid fairly in spite of that, is a true testament to the talent involved. Once in a while, this fact can be a bit obvious, but for the most part, they still manage to make something that, as far as I'm concerned, is still a total feast for the eyes. On a side note, I actually saw this film in 3D, and while I can't say that this is one of the better films that I've personally seen utilize the format, it nevertheless did help to better elevate the size and scope of things going on screen, as well as making text pop up on screen a lot more, but I think that was kind of a given. So I'd say, if you haven't seen the movie up to this point yet, I'd say this is a pretty good way of checking it out, in my opinion. Now at this point, I'm going to be going into spoiler territory so I can talk more about some of the other biggest strengths of the movie, as well as some of its unfortunate shortcomings. So if you don't want any more of this movie spoiled for you, I'd highly advise skipping right to this time frame. You good? Okay, back to it then. I think the two things that genuinely surprised me the most when watching this movie was Mighty Joe Young's character arc, and yes, that's what I'm gonna keep calling him.
Shut up! And stick it in your chin!
Going from initially not trusting Kong to slowly developing a bit of a father-son relationship leading up to the film's climax, where he actually does help out quite a bit, is honestly great to see. Speaking of, Scar King himself actually does make for a pretty solid main antagonist. It's a little hard to say whether or not I find him the most threatening, after all, he has some pretty stiff competition in that regard. But he is pretty damn vile. After all, he's not only a ruthless tyrant who shamelessly kills his own who disappoints him, but is revealed to be the one who started the Great War between Kong and Godzilla's race eons ago, causing both sides to nearly wipe each other out. On a side note, I also found myself really liking Shimo, both her design and becoming a redeemed antagonist, which makes perfect sense given that she too was a victim of Scar King's control. In her case though, it was very literal. Unfortunately, for all the movie's biggest strengths, there are a couple of complaints that I do have with it. Easily my biggest one, which, now that I think about it, is kind of becoming a bit of a worrying trend with the Monsterverse films in general, is the way the movie wraps things up. After the climactic battle, Godzilla returns to his slumber in the Colosseum in Rome, Gia reunites with and chooses to stay with Dr. Andrews in spite of finally meeting with the Iwis of Hollow Earth, because yes, that's a plot point in the movie, and Kong returns with Shimo and Mighty Joe Young to Hollow Earth, where he becomes the new leader of the Great Apes. All of these are fine, don't get me wrong, but I kid you not, this all happens within the last few minutes of the movie before the credits. It wraps things up so quickly that very little of what I just said is able to fully sink in on an emotional level. It especially sucks for Kong in particular because the movie did such a good job up to that point with its own story, so to see its conclusion wrapped up that quickly just feels a bit underwhelming. This one's a bit minor in comparison, but it does still bother me nonetheless. I guess it's fitting that Mothra was not revealed in the advertising at all until the last few weeks before the film's release, because not only is she in the movie for like 4 minutes at most, but beyond calming down and convincing Godzilla to help out Kong in Hollow Earth for the final confrontation, she doesn't really do a whole lot beyond that. It's a little hard to say exactly just how much she could have ultimately helped out in the final fight with Star King and especially Shimo, but I think she could have done something. Just anything, really. But in spite of those obvious shortcomings, the film, like I said before, is still a fantastic joyride all the way through. With just 1 or 2 more rewrites, this could have been the perfect roller coaster ride entry in the Godzilla franchise. As is, while it still isn't perfect, and those flaws I mentioned do still bother me a little bit, if you go into the movie wanting over-the-top monster fighting reminiscent of the late Showa-era Godzilla movies, then this is definitely the movie to check out. Much like with Godzilla's newly evolved look, it may seem a little bit ridiculous on the surface, but if you give it a fair chance, you just might come out feeling incredibly satisfied. I'm King Gargantuas, and take care.